Hi, this is Jennifer from Read It Again. Come sit with me while I read part 3 of The Mountains of the Moon from the Unicorn Secret series by Kathleen Duey. Please consider subscribing, and if you enjoyed this book, hit the like button and share this video with all your friends. Chapter 6. The woman's name was Toni Duhan. Her dark hair was a cloud around her face. She held the book out, turning the leaves of paper. There were no pictures. "This one was my great-grandmother's," she told Hart. Hart smiled. Toni Duhan seemed very nice. "It's about Yolen's Crossing," she added. "Where is that?" Hart asked, puzzled. Toni laughed and leaned down to pat Kip's head. "Here, this town is Yolen's Crossing. See?" She turned the book toward Hart. She ran her finger beneath some of the tiny patterns. Hart met her eyes. "I don't understand." Toni sighed. "Where are you from?" Hart hesitated. If Lord Dunraven's men came looking, they would ask people questions. "A little village a long way from here," she said finally. Toni looked sad. So many people never learned to read. Hart blinked. "Read?" Toni nodded. "Read. It's rare enough, but at least Lord Ermadeath doesn't forbid books the way most others do." Hart saw the anger in Toni's eyes. "Listen," Toni said suddenly. She opened the book. She looked down at it and began speaking. "The two largest towns are now Yolen's Crossing and San Coville farther west," she said. She kept talking. She traced a zigzag line with her finger as she spoke, sliding line by line down the paper. It took Hart a long time to figure it out. When she did, she got the shivers. This was amazing. The little patterns were words somehow. Toni could look at them and say them aloud. Hart listened intently. She watched Toni's eyes go back and forth. The story began with the people who had come to this place long ago. A family named Yolen had been the first. They had made a fine farm in the valley. They had built the first little store and a flour mill on the river. Other farmers had come to settle. The book told their names and where they had lived. And then Tallman Ermadeath was named Lord of the Land, Toni read. Hart nodded to let Toni know she was listening. He claimed the fields and mountains. He took a share of every harvest. He hunted the unicorns in the forests. Hart made a little sound. Toni glanced up. Hart got a second set of shivers. Ash Grove's story had a unicorn in it too, but no one had believed it. "Please go on," she said quietly. "You could learn to read it yourself," Toni said. Hart swallowed. "Is it hard?" Toni smiled. "A little, but it's worth it. I could teach you." "Could you teach me right now?" Hart asked. She didn't want to leave the unicorns alone any longer than she had to. Toni smiled. "It would take a few weeks to get you started." Hart thought about the book in her carry sack. She longed to find out what it said about the rearing unicorns, but she was afraid to show it to Toni. She wanted to learn how to read too, but she couldn't stay for weeks. She shouldn't stay even another hour. "I have to go," she said sadly, "but thank you very much." Toni closed the book and straightened. "You could come back tomorrow." Hart looked at the ground. "Are you staying on a farm near town? Would your family mind?" Toni asked. Hart let out a careful breath. She couldn't tell this kind woman about the rearing unicorns, or where she was from, or anything else. She shouldn't even be talking to her. "I can't," she said carefully, "but thank you very much." Toni sighed, then nodded, then tapped the book with one graceful finger. This book was written by a woman who died 200 years ago. Hart was amazed. She started to ask who the woman had been and how she'd made all the little marks so neatly. Then the sound of hoofbeats made her turn. 2 men had turned their horses down the lane. They were riding at a clattering trot. They wore dark shirts. Both had crossbows and swords. Tony slid the book into a pocket of her skirt. She nodded at the riders. Hart glanced at the men as they passed. Lord Ermadeath is sending his men all the way past San Coville, Tony said once they were gone. No one seems to know why. She twirled the clover between her fingers. Between 2 fingers. Have you heard about anything? Hart didn't answer for a moment. Then she stepped back. I have to go, she repeated. Tony nodded. Come back any time. I will teach you to read. Hart smiled and thanked her again. She called Kip and they headed back toward the main road. She would walk out of town the way she had come in. If she saw Lord Ermadeath's men again, they would think she was a farm girl just as Tony had. Hart could feel the corner of the book pressing against her back. She had to learn to read somehow. She had to find out what it said about the rearing unicorns. Maybe the book would tell her where her family lived. But first she had to get as far away from Lord Dunraven and the rumors about Moonsilver as she could. Maybe in San Coville she could find someone to help. Hart walked faster. Chapter 7. Hart kept going. She tried to travel fast. It was hard to keep the unicorns hidden, but they seemed to understand that they had to stay where the forest was thickest. Hart played her flute in 2 tiny mountain villages. The people were poor. They gave her food instead of pennies. They tossed Kip bits of meat from their own dinners. Then the roads began to lead downhill and the land leveled out. The river Hart followed was wide and lazy. Every day more people and wagons passed on the road. Hart could see them in glimpses through the trees. There were farmers' wagons. People in fancy carriages went by too. The women wore long dresses and hats with flowers and feathers. There were people leading cows and goats too. Their clothes were clean and plain. San Coville must be a big town, Hart said to Avonmere. All kinds of people are going there. The unicorn mare tossed her head. The gypsy bells jingled. Then they jingled again. Hart stared. Avonmere hadn't tossed her head a second time. The bells sounded again, distant and silvery. Hart turned to peer through the branches. There was no one on the road. You're imagining it, she told herself. Moonsilver reached out to nudge her shoulder with his muzzle. An instant later, the sound of tiny gypsy bells came again. Hart peeked out of the trees. Moonsilver and Avonmere followed. They stood close behind her. Kip wagged his tail, his ears raised forward. That's Binny's wagon, Hart breathed. The whole caravan of bright-colored wagons was coming around the bend in the road. Hart ached to run toward her friends, but she knew she couldn't. Stay back, she said to the unicorns. We'll just wait until they pass. Kip barked. Hush, Hart scolded him. He barked again. Hart reached down to hold him back, but it was already too late. Kip bounded out of the trees. Hart covered her mouth with one hand. She could only watch as Kip streaked toward the road. She heard the shouts when Binny spotted Kip. He raced in circles around Sadie, Fiona's dog. The gypsies reined in their ponies. They lined up along the edge of the road, shading their eyes, looking out over the meadow. Hart ducked back into the trees. We would only bring them harm, she began. But Avonmere pawed at the ground with a forehoof. Moonsilver reared, striking at the air. Then they walked past Hart into the open meadow. On the road, the gypsies saw them and cheered. Binny waved joyously. Josepha and Talia shouted Hart's name, their hands cupped around their mouths. Hart felt her eyes flood with tears. She stepped out of the trees and waved. Whistles and cheers made her grin. The gypsies found a gentle enough slope, and one by one the wagons lurched down it and into the meadow. Once the wagons were stopped in their usual neat circle, Binny jumped down. Binny, Hart cried out. She ran toward the gypsy woman. "Oh, we've missed you," Binny said. She swung Hart off her feet and turned in a circle. When Binny set her down, Hart saw Davy smiling at her. Behind him, Zim was grinning. "They are beautiful," Binny said, looking at the unicorns. "I love watching them, and I will always be grateful to Moonsilver for saving Davy." Hart smiled at her. "I missed all of you so much." "The rumors have run this way," Binny told her. "I know," Hart said. Binny glanced up at the sky. "We have an hour before sunset." She raised her chin and her voice. "A celebration tonight. Our dear Hart has come back to us." Hart smiled at her, then glanced at Avamere and Moonsilver. They were moving back into the trees. It would be all right if they stayed with the gypsies for a night or two, she thought. She was so glad to be with them. It felt wonderful to be with people who cared about her, people who loved Kip and Moonsilver and Avamere. That night it was chilly. Kip curled up between the unicorns behind a copse of trees. Hart slept soundly in Binny's wagon. Her dreams were shadowy and dark. The mountains she ran in were steep and bleak. When she cried out, Binny reached out to soothe her. Chapter 8. For 2 days, the gypsies traveled the road. Hart and the unicorns walked along a wooded creek that ran below it. Kip ran back and forth between them. Hart told the gypsies everything that had happened to her, except for the part about accidentally stealing the book. She wanted to show it to them. She decided not to. It would only put them in more danger. She didn't want Lord Dunraven to be able to blame the gypsies for anything. The next morning they came to a village. Hart and the unicorns went around it. They all met on the other side. When they stopped for noon dinner, Davy brought Hart a bowl of sweet, spicy beans. They were steaming hot and delicious. A woman in that last town said Lord Ermadeath's men rode through yesterday. Hart set down the bowl. Davy's eyes were deep and sad. Avamere stopped grazing and lifted her head. Hart sighed. "We should leave today. We should get as far away from you as we can." Davy shrugged unhappily. "I almost wish Moonsilver wasn't a real unicorn." Hart felt an idea bloom inside her. "Davy," she began carefully, "if they found a fake unicorn, they would stop looking for a real one." Trembling with hope, she pulled the goat horn from her carry sack. Davy turned it over in his hands. He looked up, puzzled. "We can teach the act to Avamere," he said. "At the next show, you can pretend to fall and she can touch you." "And that's it!" Davy shouted. "I'll tell Binny." Hart watched him splash across the little creek as he headed back toward the wagons. Avamere sidled closer. She lowered her head to sniff at the goat horn. "Will you stand for sticky pine gum on your forehead?" Hart asked her. Avamere wrinkled her upper lip. Hart laughed. Moonsilver came close, reaching over Hart's head to nuzzle his mother's shoulder. Hart stepped back and watched them. Moonsilver was tall now, nearly as tall as Avamere. Avamere was still a good mother, kind and gentle. Moonsilver wasn't timid anymore, though. "Performing with the gypsies cured your shyness," Hart told him. Then she laughed again. "And mine, I think." The next day, walking, Hart made up a tune for Avamere's act. By mid-morning, the unicorn mare understood perfectly. Hart saved bits of bread from her noontime meal. Every time she played the tune, she tossed a piece to Kip. By evening, he had learned to come when he heard the new melody. The next morning, Avamere and Kip both came running when Hart played the tune. Avamere raced with Kip, just as Moonsilver had. Moonsilver watched them practice for a while, then he wandered off to graze. Hart liked the new melody. It was a slower, more serious melody than the one Kip had liked. It fit Avamere better. As they walked, Hart kept glancing up the slope to the road. It felt wonderful to be with the gypsies again. Playing the flute made her feel happy. Hart kissed Moonsilver on the muzzle as he and Avamere settled to sleep that evening. Kip lay between them, as usual. Hart walked up to the gypsy camp. By the bright campfire, she explained her idea to Binny. Avamir is nearly trained, Hart finished. In 2 days? Binny asked. Hart smiled. Binny nodded thoughtfully. It'll work, I think. We'll be in San Coville in 4 days. Will you be ready by then? Of course she will, Zim said from behind Binny. Hart nodded, grinning. The firelight flickered, lighting the gypsies' faces. Hart, watch, Talia called. Talia and Josepha had learned how to balance full pitchers of water on their heads. Hart played them a slow, graceful melody. Talia and Josepha danced in gliding circles. Their arms rose and fell. Their fingers and hands seemed to dance. The water in the pitchers swayed gently. Will you play for us in San Coville? Talia asked. Hart nodded. We made the most beautiful shawls to wear, Josepha told her. I have more cloth, an older woman said from the fireside. I'll stitch one for Hart. Hart recognized her. It was Talia's aunt, the one who had loaned her a costume in Dairytown. It seemed so long ago. Hart raised the flute and began to play. Her sleeve slid up over her wrist. The silver sparkle of the bracelet was burnished into sunset colors by the firelight. Join me next time when I read Part 4 of The Mountains of the Moon.